Right now, a sensation. Is the Baltic front situation in the region reaching its breaking point? No one expected this. A NATO strike on the Russian Federation, it seems this can no longer be stopped. Devastating raids, Magyar's drones are turning the Kremlin's war machine to ashes. Putin can't take it anymore. What the Ukrainian soldiers have done has shocked everyone. No one expected such a strike from the Ukrainian armed forces. Nuclear shock, France is sending missiles with nuclear warheads to Poland. The readiness to strike Russia is off the charts. Putin is in a panic. Moscow is preparing chaos, an invasion of Moldova. The attack has already begun. A shocking strike is being prepared against Ukraine. Odessa is in the Kremlin's crosshairs. A bloodbath for Transnistria. A catastrophe in the Russian army. A devastating strike by the Ukrainian armed forces has crushed thousands of Russians. The Russian army is on the brink of apocalypse. Now the only way to storm is by marching. This is a catastrophe. Moscow is under attack. This is the end for Russia. There is no gasoline and it looks like there won't be any. Magyar's drones are doing their job. The Kremlin era is spiraling into a black hole. Putin is losing oil, gasoline, and control over the country. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot? Breaking news. A new front in Europe? Is the NATO Baltic front really reaching for the red button? Article activated. The alliance is gathering forces for a deadly strike against the Russian Federation. Europe is on the brink of war. Will the Baltic region become the trigger for World War III? Watch right now.
The war in the Baltics is already underway. After the incursion of 3 Russian fighter jets, which literally reached the capital of Estonia, NATO's Article 4 was activated there.
We are convening consultations under Article 4. If you put together everything that has happened over the past couple of weeks, including the attack on Poland with 19 drones, this is already a systematic test of NATO. The 12-minute violation of Estonian airspace requires a decisive response, both politically and practically.
Yes, indeed, war with the Russian Federation is absolutely real. That's obvious. This is a demonstration to Europeans of their indecisiveness and the fact that NATO, in essence, is not standing up to the challenges.
Germany, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic have stated provocations downed.
We are testing our resilience, our determination to defend ourselves. I think we must be extremely firm in that if there are violations of the rules, we must respond to them appropriately, including by military means, in this specific case by shooting down the aircraft. And only then will Russia very quickly realize that it has made a mistake.
But any real action against Russia is still a long way off. For example, US President Trump has been avoiding this topic for several days now.
I won't say anything about this yet, but I will be briefed soon and I'll let you know today or tomorrow. I don't like it when things like this happen. This could cause major problems.
Now we are approaching the obvious consequences of the United States' reluctance to actually fulfill its own obligations in ensuring European security. Because Europe has no other options. And there's nowhere else for them to buy it. The military-industrial complex isn't scaled up and there is no army. Everyone is ready to trade elegantly and live richly, but to be honest, in Europe, they've gotten out of the habit of defending their interests with weapons in hand.
Moreover, information has appeared in the press that the US wants to completely abandon the defense of the Baltic countries.
Because when information literally just came out that the US is refusing to provide air defense systems to the Baltic countries and will likely withdraw troops over time and is already reducing military aid, this is exactly the opposite of what European countries expect in the face of such acts of aggression from Russia, with the United States stepping back.
Russia has been staging provocations in the Baltics for 4 years now. For example, they are actively using an illegal shadow fleet there to transport oil. Estonia detained one of these tankers that lacked proper documentation. However, after an inspection, the ship was later released. We all indeed.
Will monitor and inspect Russian fleet ships if anything suspicious arises, and Russia is getting nervous about this. This is Russia's illegal way of making money for the war in Ukraine and conducting hybrid operations against European NATO countries.
Right now, and this is important, it is by no means certain that Putin is actually planning a military operation against EU and NATO countries. In simple terms, Putin wants to get what he needs without war, simply by escalating the military threat around European countries and demonstrating their weakness and inability to even protect themselves.
In addition, the Russians have repeatedly disabled communication cables between European countries in the Baltic Sea. Because of this, another tanker was detained off the coast of Finland, and this time the crew is facing criminal charges.
I believe the conclusion we can draw is that it's time to get used to a new reality. A lot of similar things could happen in the future. Of course, when something like this happened last year, the ship left the Baltic Sea, but this year we have already detained it.
Tolerating such incidents, of course, is basically giving Putin a green light to keep doing this and even escalate the corresponding threats. In other words, if we don't punish Putin, it will only motivate him even more to go further. You can clearly see this significant escalation not only directed towards Ukraine, but also extending towards the European Union and all NATO countries.
As long as NATO countries hesitate, it definitely gives Putin free rein and makes it clear that he can act with impunity, doing anything from minor provocations to direct invasion of the Baltic countries.
Apocalypse of the Russian Federation. Birdies, Hungarian drones destroying everything. Astounding results. This is a new generation of warfare. Ukrainian drones have broken the frontline logistics of Putin's regime. Refineries, equipment, and manpower all turned to ashes. The world is giving a standing ovation. Watch all the fiery details right now.
Almost 77,000 Russian targets have been hit. 18,500 occupiers have been eliminated. The Russian Federation, fuel crisis, Hungary is furious. And all these are the results of just 100 days of work. The work of Robert Brody, callsign Magyar, in his role as commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces.
All the efforts of the SPS Group Command are focused on increasing the capabilities of the SPS branch of the military, which had been effectively squandered in the previous year. It doesn't matter for what reasons, but that's a fact. SBS is becoming a force that directly influences the front line.
Russian oil refineries have felt this influence especially acutely and profoundly. In August alone, unmanned systems forces attacked Russian oil refineries 17 times. Almost a quarter of the enemy's production capacity was put out of commission. Again, we're only talking about August. In September, the SBS did not stop either. As a result, there is a fuel crisis in Russia. There is no gasoline at many gas stations, both in Russia itself and temporarily in the occupied territories.
Gasoline prices have been jacked up 2 or 3 times. That's why there's no connection. To leave at that particular price point would just be like severely hurting yourself. That is precisely why we absolutely cannot leave at this moment.
Online, the strikes by unmanned systems forces are already being called Magyar's sanctions. The latest ones have affected not only Russia, but also the Kremlin's loyal servants, particularly Hungary. Because friendship with Russia is a bad idea. The Druzhba oil pipeline has been hit multiple times, and each time the oil transfer was halted. The Hungarian authorities were furious, threatened Ukraine, and even banned Magyar himself from entering the country. But Brody didn't seem particularly upset.
There are plenty of real Magyars in Hungary, and one day you'll leave them to it. And as for limiting Schengen, you're biting off more than you can chew. You have a strange sense of humor. And your special agents aren't even in the top 10, so get in line.
And these are only the results that can be seen with the naked eye. There's also the routine work, eliminating occupiers and their equipment. By the way, there have also been impressive successes in this area. Just think about shooting down the expensive Russian Ariane drone. What an achievement. This strike reconnaissance UAV was shot down for the first time since the start of the full-scale war. The cost of this drone exceeds $5 million. According to Magyar, the effectiveness of unmanned systems forces has increased by 71% compared to May of last year. And it's safe to say this is only the beginning. There will be even more strikes. Russia, we should get used to gasoline shortages in Hungary, bury the friendship, and ordinary occupiers should remember, drones are watching everywhere.
This sensation could change everything. Nuclear power in the heart of Europe. NATO is on edge. Poland is pulling up a nuclear shield against Russia. The Kremlin is furious. Our X is closer than it seemed. The nuclear factor could explode at any moment now.
A new nuclear axis of Europe. Poland is ready to become a country with its own nuclear shield.
As the President of the Republic of Poland, I believe that Poland should participate in nuclear sharing. And it should have its own nuclear energy, both civilian and military capabilities.
According to Nawrocki, on this issue, Poland is counting on support from France. For Warsaw, this is not just about an alliance, but a way to obtain the very weapon that will change the rules of the game in Europe and challenge both Moscow and Brussels.
This statement by the Polish president came shortly after an unprecedented Russian drone attack on Poland. And although this time dozens of drones were reconnaissance drones that did not pose an immediate military threat, many in Warsaw continue to fear that the attack will be repeated. And next time, they could be combat drones.
To solidify nuclear cooperation, Poland is preparing to sign a new treaty, a document intended to deepen collaboration in the fields of defense and security. And although Nawrocki admits that it is still too early to talk about this, his position is clear. Poland is deliberately participating in nuclear sharing.
The significant fact that Poland is now beginning to seriously consider its own direct participation in receiving nuclear weapons from its Western allies clearly demonstrates the profound level of concern that currently exists within many Central European countries, especially given the ongoing and increasingly devastating Russian-Ukrainian war and the apparent lack of understanding among Western leaders about precisely how they can actually effectively stop this protracted war in the foreseeable future and adequately counter Russia's aggressive ambitions, which are actively and consistently supported from the very top. And there is a growing and increasingly profound understanding that if Vladimir Putin's relentless desire to continue this protracted and devastating war against Ukraine indefinitely is not decisively stopped by concerted Western efforts, and with very little genuine hope currently placed on the unpredictable actions of Donald Trump, this brutal conflict will inevitably keep taking on new and more dangerous forms and will eventually cross Ukraine's sovereign borders, impacting wider global stability.
Alarmed by the recent air incursion, Poland has quickly begun adopting Ukraine's experience in countering Russian drones. Poland's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz arrived in Kyiv along with delegations from the country's defense and armed forces. On the agenda are military technical cooperation, further support for Ukraine's defense, and the overall security situation in the context of Russian aggression.
Now we see that one way or another, this is direct evidence not just of Ukraine needing to adopt Western military experience, but rather the reverse. That these countries must now adopt a significant part of Ukraine's experience in waging war, modern war, real war, which no longer fully aligns with the textbooks taught at the best military academies of NATO, with all due respect to their expertise. And this actually creates for us an additional marker of mutual dependence.
Warsaw and Kyiv have also agreed to cooperate in countering drones, to share information about aerial threats, and to implement technologies for the rapid deployment of reconnaissance and strike drones.
A possible analysis from Russia is that this is a kind of reconnaissance to see how Europe would act in the event of the outbreak of an armed conflict. So, for example, if Russia were to truly and seriously violate airspace, what kind of NATO response forces could be mobilized? What do they look like? Where do they come from? And how many and what types of aircraft take off? In other words, to clearly understand the framework of the response. If Russia is indeed conducting such a comprehensive and thorough analysis at a very serious level, it is a significant sign that we should actually be preparing ourselves for a truly serious and potentially devastating military clash between Western and Russian armed forces, regardless of what ultimately happens with Ukraine, whether the ongoing war in Ukraine eventually ends or not.
At the same time, Poland is launching an unprecedented program called rearmament. Its expenditures are enormous, particularly on combat aircraft and helicopters, a wide range of armored vehicles, tube and rocket artillery systems, modern air defense systems, and munitions. At the same time, Warsaw is actively ramping up its own weapons production. In addition, the country has planned a record defense budget for next year, 200 billion zlotys, or about $55 billion, which amounts to roughly 4.8% of GDP. Furthermore, efforts are underway to significantly increase the size of the armed forces from 200,000 to 500,000 personnel. The Polish authorities emphasize in every possible way that the country is using all available resources to guarantee its own security. Poland is using all its power, constantly stressing that the country...
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Shock. Putin is preparing an offensive on Odessa. The president of Moldova is sounding the alarm. A new bridgehead for a breakthrough into Ukraine is forming near the Dniester. Unthinkable provocation, bribery and chaos are happening there. The Kremlin is destroying Moldova and striking at Europe. This is Moscow's infernal plan. Watch now for all the details.
Everything will be decided this coming weekend. By disrupting the elections, Russia is trying to seize power in Moldova and overthrow the government, after which the country could be used as a springboard for an attack on Ukraine. President Maya Sandu addressed the nation with this video message.
If Russia gains control over Moldova, the consequences will be immediate, and they threaten not only our country but the entire region. Freedom of movement could come to an end, and our land could become a springboard for infiltration into the Odessa region. The Transnistrian region will be destabilized.
At the same time, experts believe that it is precisely Transnistria that poses a particular danger today.
Let me remind you, Moldova shares 1,222 kilometers of border with Ukraine. Moldova is a small country, but we are connected to Ukraine by important infrastructure projects, so the stakes are high.
There, traditionally, the population has the most pro-Russian sentiments, and it is clear that the Moldovan authorities have not done enough work with them over all these years.
Politicians have called on Maya Sandu to take control of Transnistria. This pro-Russian enclave is today a huge problem not only for her country, but for the entire European continent. Of course, it's not solely her responsibility, but the main initiative in this matter really does belong to her. If she had initiated the appropriate processes and changed the agenda regarding Transnistria, she would be facing significantly fewer threats today.
It was decided to fight back only at the final stage. So, less than a week before the parliamentary elections in Moldova, authorities began identifying and detaining possible participants in the unrest that the Kremlin is already preparing for election day. Kiendi.
This is connected to the forceful protests being prepared after the elections. The criminal world still remains part of this overall post-Soviet system of thieves in law, and so, with the help of these people and structures, forceful protests were being prepared both inside prisons and on the outside. And just this morning, the police, together with the special services and the Security and Information Service, carried out operations to prevent these actions.
Thus, during a search on September 22nd in Moldova, 74 people were detained who are suspected of undergoing training in Serbia to organize rallies and protests. In particular, they were trained abroad in handling firearms and special equipment. For this, the participants received about 400 euros. Law enforcement officials claim that Russian special services are behind these operations, and the suspects are connected both to Moldovan political parties and to criminal groups, while the investigation itself has been ongoing since July of this year. But the use of force is only part of the Kremlin's tactics having practiced in Romania. In Moldova, they also decided to employ mass interference in the elections through social media.
That is, a deliberately insane number of short videos are being recorded for TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and all of them are distributed in Romanian and in Russian, but with Moldovan themes to specifically attract the attention of our citizens. And this is what they're betting on.
For those who are older and haven't yet mastered TikTok, there's a different program, the very same Russian Orthodox Church, which has assimilated in Moldova, but still pursues the same religious goals, complete subordination to Moscow.
Another one of these concrete pillars of identity, so to speak, is the Orthodox connection with Russia, because this is a Turkic Orthodox people who historically were supposedly relocated here by the Russian Federation, and to this day they express their belonging and gratitude through their love for Russia. And so Orthodoxy, specifically Orthodoxy in the Russian style, serves as a point of connection, a point of communication with Russia for them. And of course, Russia uses this to strengthen its political influence, as well as to increase its economic and separatist influence over the regions.
At the same time, analysts remind us that Moldova's political system is organized in such a way that the parliament has significantly broader powers, including regarding the country's foreign policy directions, so the election of the government is almost more important than the election of the country's leader.
It seems to me that Unfortunately, there is a lack of understanding. If we talk about society as a whole in percentage terms, there is a lack of understanding of the degree of threat, because people think, well, my God, how many times has this happened already? We had the pro-Russian Voronin in power, then he was replaced, then there was the pro-Russian Dodon, and he was replaced again. But all of this was before the illness of that very northern dictator reached such an extreme stage, when he attacks neighboring countries, launches drones over the European Union. And I think that if this time we end up in his clutches again, it won't be as easy to get out as it was last time.
Experts also believe that this week will remain tense right up until the elections, which will already take place this weekend. At the same time, the authorities are urging people to stay alert around the clock, since this is essentially Russia's last chance to turn Moldova away from European integration by relatively peaceful means.
The Kremlin, it seems, truly lost the initial phase of the hybrid war back in the autumn of 2024, when it actively tried to disrupt the crucial referendum and indeed Maya Sandu's re-election efforts. And now the intense battle is currently unfolding over the very control of parliament.
Scrap metal instead of an army, the military budget is collapsing. The troops are on the verge of disaster, there are no more tanks, and Russian soldiers are marching to their deaths. Not even tank cannibalism can save them. This is a complete failure of Putin's military machine. Could it be that Russian tanks have disappeared forever? Oh, so what happened? Watch the full story in the following segment.
Russian tanks are on the verge of extinction. It seems the Russian military-industrial complex can't cope, and soon there will be nothing left to fight with at all. And apparently sanctions are to blame here.
The role of sanctions here is more about the fact that these are ongoing processes. This is an increase, a deterioration, where both price and quality are affected, and Russia is being cut off quite strictly from leading technologies like artificial intelligence, which everyone else could be developing.
It seems that Russia's supposedly resilient economy, according to Putin's words, is finally showing a noticeable crack.
Sooner or later, the inevitable overheating of the military economy may not necessarily lead to its complete collapse, but rather to a very sharp and significant decline. The general economic trends in the Russian Federation will also affect the military sector of the economy.
It would seem that, for the first time since 2022, salaries have started to fall at Russia's most important enterprises. And yes, we're talking about companies in the military-industrial complex.
Undoubtedly, the lending to enterprises in the military-industrial complex has an impact. And there is a difference in the form and volume of this lending compared to the non-military sector. This used to be an advantage, but now it's working against them. Having essentially reached its peak, it's now either a plateau or a decline.
But how do staffing shortages and economic problems affect the increase in Russia's military-industrial output?
When it comes to the Russian economy's ability to supply the army, to provide military equipment and ammunition, those capabilities are not limitless either. Moreover, with the rapid expansion of the modern Russian economy, they might reach Soviet-era levels.
Of course, sanctions are no joke, especially when they worsen the condition and quality of your military equipment. They might even halt the production of new equipment altogether. But that's when Soviet-era tanks come to the rescue.
The primary focus then shifted to the crucial task of restoring the Soviet equipment. Even with old Soviet equipment from storage, restoring ammunition and overhauling them for combat readiness, those resources are not limitless either.
But the time has come when old equipment doesn't make the job easier. In fact, it makes it harder.
There are fewer and fewer units that can actually be repaired. They have to repair things that aren't really repairable just to keep them running. They have to assemble working units from several broken ones. This requires significantly more effort, work, and so on.
As a result, instead of producing new and modern equipment, Russia is increasingly using old and worn-out hardware.
The production of new equipment is hindered by sanctions, among other things, as well as by the unpreparedness of the manufacturing base. That's why ramping up production of modern types of weaponry is so difficult. These current rates are nowhere near the substantial rates Russia truly needs to adequately make up for its significant losses on the battlefield, so they much prefer to fund those specific things that will deliver tangible and immediate results here and now, rather than tomorrow or even the day after that.
We also shouldn't forget about Putin's loyal friends China and Iran, who are actually helping them a great deal. But any such delivery is more a way for Beijing to effectively keep Moscow on a very short leash.
It's precisely China's technological base that is helping the Russians stay afloat. But at the very same time, the Chinese are actively helping Moscow from the powerful position of a suzerain, so they consistently keep their firm hand on the crucial tap. If Moscow acts properly, they might open the tap further.
But in the end, what do we have as of today? It is known that in 2024, Russia's military industry has reached the limits of its capabilities. But what are Russia's prospects now?
There might very well be what's commonly called a plateau. When you've thoroughly reached the absolute maximum indicators, further significant growth becomes truly impossible, but you can effectively prevent a decline through careful administrative measures and strategic interventions.
The only question is, how long will the Kremlin be able to maintain this level, and will it turn out that an unexpected blow comes not from the front, but from within?
Corruption within Russia is a significant and unexpected ally for external forces. The more the high-ranking generals and the powerful icebreakers of the Russian economy, particularly those deeply embedded within the vast military-industrial complex, continue their pervasive and systemic stealing, the less stable their position becomes. This rampant corruption erodes their foundation and diminishes their chances of maintaining their current elevated plateau of power and influence. It is evident that they are indeed stealing a substantial amount of resources and wealth. Their insatiable appetites for illicit gains appear to grow exponentially with each passing year, further weakening the state from within.
But of course, sanctions are only a small part of what can help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, an important factor is also the increase in Ukrainian military weapons production.
We can't believe that sanctions will solve everything. We also need to develop our own capabilities, which is what we're doing, and respond to strikes with strikes. This is one way, and sanctions are just an alternative to weapons, but not a replacement for weapons, so we need to work on both fronts.
There's no gasoline, but hang in there. The fuel crisis in Russia is gaining momentum and is even approaching Moscow. The Kremlin is in a panic. The Ukrainian armed forces are striking oil refineries and railways, which is worsening the fuel situation in the swamps. Russia is already in a deep gasoline collapse. Panic is growing. This is not just a blow. It's the beginning of an energy catastrophe and the decline of the Kremlin. All the details coming up next.
Russia, long nicknamed the gas station, has suddenly been left without gasoline. What once seemed unthinkable is now reality. Gas stations are closing one after another in the regions, their signs showing empty lines, and there are queues at the pumps. Independent networks are disappearing, major ones are holding on, but even there it's increasingly hard to find the usual gasoline or even diesel.
Russia is facing a fuel crisis. Ukrainian drone strikes have destroyed a significant part of the oil refining system.
In a country that for decades lived off selling oil and fuel, today there is simply nothing to fill up your car with. At first the shortage hit the provinces, but now it has come right up to Moscow.
Previously, Ukraine targeted plants with a capacity of about 6 to 7 million tons of oil processing per year. And to understand just how painful the strike on the Kirishi refinery is, you need to mentally multiply that by 3. This plant is 3 times more powerful than those Ukraine had previously put out of commission.
How did it come to this? It's very simple. The authorities decided that gasoline is needed not for the people but for the war. Billions of dollars are being spent on missiles that are launched at Ukrainian cities. Russian oil refineries, the country's main fuel kitchens, have become legitimate targets for well-meaning drones. And they are arriving. Refineries are shutting down, logistics are collapsing. What was once considered a safety margin turned out to be just a facade.
Oh.
Yes, it's actually flying.
But we're not in its path, that's all.
Repairs, fuel shortages, supply disruptions, this is now the reality for ordinary Russians. Delays are reaching up to a month and a half, and in some places the fuel simply doesn't arrive at all. And if before, the country that was once a gas station for half the world, now it can't even supply its own regions.
Just imagine that entire whole line won't be able to fully fill up.
And now we shall now begin.
The picture: more expensive gasoline, kilometer-long lines, and a growing dependence on a few large companies. Small gas stations are dying out, there's no competition, prices keep rising, and the consumer is left hostage.
Naturally, they are absolutely furious, truly trying to get their profound outrage across to the very top. Like, please do something. You absolutely have to do something. What exactly is the army for? Push, push, push. You can...
Of course, believe the words of the Minister of Energy, who promises to adjust refinery maintenance and keep price growth within inflation. But can you really still trust these words? While the minister is talking on air, people are driving from gas station to gas station in search of at least a couple of liters.
But no gasoline, not even alcohol.
Not for myself alone.
These temporary difficulties are a direct consequence of the war. Russia is spending its resources on destroying a neighboring country while it is collapsing from within. When drones strike factories, it's no longer just a news headline, it's a reality that everyone sees, from Siberia to the Volga region, and from Kuban to the center of the country. The irony is that for decades the Kremlin blackmailed the world with oil and gas, and now it's facing its own weapon. Fuel has become scarce at home, and this is only the beginning. If the situation doesn't change, Moscow itself risks ending up in the very lines at empty pumps that it once took pride in avoiding.
I hope this is just a temporary. That's
all for now, and for more hot news from the front, tune into our next episode.